World War I saw women take up a range of jobs they had never completed before. This societal shift changed the world of work for good. Production was vital for all sides during World War I. The steady supply of everything from bullets and shells to gas masks was crucial for success on the Western Front and in the other theaters of the war. Most critical of all were the munitions factories. Following the shell crisis in Britain in 1915, the government appealed to women to volunteer to take up jobs in these factories to increase production. Around the same time, the number of German women working in munitions also rose. America too saw the same influx of women following its entry into the war in 1917. These munitionettes, as they were known in Britain, were relatively well paid, but their work could be dangerous. Working with machinery resulted in frequent accidents that could leave women missing fingers. With the entry of the U.S. into the war in 1917, young women signed up in their thousands to join the American Red Cross as well as the Army and Navy Nurse Corps. Many nurses arrived in France before the American Expeditionary Force themselves. Whether professional or AVAD, life as a nurse meant facing the cruel realities of 20th century warfare. It also meant hard work. During major offensives, nurses worked long shifts with little time for rest or even food. Nurses weren't necessarily safe from the dangers of war either. Perhaps the most famous nurse of World War I was Edith Cavell, who worked in German-occupied Belgium. She helped smuggle hundreds of Allied soldiers out of German territory until her arrest in 1915. In October of that year, she was tried and sentenced to death by firing squad. As soon as the war began, women pressed for more opportunities to contribute to the war effort, including roles within the armed services in Britain. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was formed in 1917 and attracted over 50,000 volunteers by the end of the war. The roles fulfilled by the women of the Auxiliary Corps were limited to the likes of catering and administration, but that didn't mean they stayed out of danger. More than 80 women in the WAAC were killed during the course of their service. The Women's Royal Naval Service and the Women's Royal Air Service were also established. During the war, in total, over 100,000 women in World War I joined the British Armed Forces. The U.S. and Britain both saw the opportunity to supplement their armed services with a female workforce, but neither permitted women to fight. That wasn't the case elsewhere. In 1917, Russia began creating women's battalions, including the first Russian Women's Battalion of Death led by Maria Botchkarev. Farming was another area that saw its workforce significantly reduced during the war. Once again, women stepped into the breach. Around 23,000 women in World War I were recruited into the Women's Land Army in Britain. Although this represents only a fraction of the hundreds of thousands of women who worked on the land during the war,